Stop calling spin. Stop calling spin. Spin is not a fault in volleyball. In this video, I'll walk through what the rules are and how refs are calling the game and how spin in and of itself is not a fault. It's a common misconception. There are two main calls for a bad handset in volleyball. So if you get a decent pass from your partner and you come to handset the ball, there's basically two things that would cause this to be a bad set. One is a double contact. This just means you contact the ball at slightly different times and it's not simultaneous contact. Or you have a lift, or sometimes it's called a catch, and that just means you basically held on to the ball for too long. In either of these scenarios, the ball, if it does have spin, it may indicate that you had a lift or a catch or a double contact, but spin in and of itself is not a fault in volleyball. So let's look at the rules first. There are a few different rule sets. Today I'm going to be talking about the California rules. Beach volleyball originated in California, so there's a lot of history here in California. I'm also going to talk about FIVB, or that's the international rules, Federation of International Volleyball, FIVB. And FIVB has rules for indoor and outdoor that are, there are some differences and some similarities. So California beach volleyball rules. As of 2020, a contact of the ball with two hands using the fingers to direct the ball is a set. A player may set the ball in any direction towards his or her team's court, provided that the ball is contacted simultaneously by both hands and does not visibly come to rest. Rotation of the ball after the set may indicate a held ball or multiple contacts during the set, but in itself is not a fault. So basically what they're saying is if you see a lot of rotation on the ball, it might indicate that maybe there was a lift or a multiple contact. But in and of itself, rotation is not a bad set. So let's take a look at the finals. The last finals of the 2019 season, it was the US versus the Netherlands in the finals at the World Championship. And in this tournament, we're talking the best of the best. These are the best two teams in the world on this particular day. And let's just look at how much rotation they're getting away with. And there was only one set called, one hand set called during this first set that I watched. And if we watch this set, you can see that there's no rotation. So I don't know if the call was a lift or a multiple contact, but whatever the referee saw, it wasn't spin. I think it's the slight adjustment you see here. As it falls into his hands, it adjusts just very slightly, and I think that's what it's called. So it turns out spin is a terrible indicator of a bad set at the higher levels, because when we look at the stats, we see a lot of balls with spin and none of them are getting called as a double or a lift. And then the one call we do see that's a double or a lift didn't have any rotation at all on it. So spin is a terrible indicator of a bad set at the higher levels of volleyball. Why are people so crazy about spin? I think it has a lot to do with history. I think spin actually did make a big difference in the early days of beach volleyball. Even though the rules are identical for indoor and outdoor, when it comes to a double contact and a lift, the interpretation of the rules has been pretty different. So in beach volleyball, historically, you've been able to hold the ball a lot longer than an indoor setter can. So an indoor setter has to have the ball in and out really quickly, whereas a beach volleyball player can kind of take their time getting that ball out. And the trade-off is when that ball does come out, traditionally, they liked to see that ball not have any spin, and they used to think of that as a very clean looking set. And we can see an example here of traditionally clean set in beach volleyball. So in this example here, you see this setter sets a ball and you can see how still it is in the air. So this is kind of what people used to look for. So it's kind of a history thing, But that history is exactly that. It's history. It's something that's no longer relevant. We have shifted, the referees have shifted their attention away from spin on a ball. And so you're still seeing this at the lower levels, and you're still seeing people super adamant. But it's okay to stop them in their tracks, because the rules don't support their attitudes about calling spin. And certainly the referees at the highest levels are no longer supporting these attitudes that spin is bad. Another reason people get so crazy about spin is a seed that was planted in a lot of the collective minds of volleyball players is this rule of thumb. And the rule of thumb is, oh, if the ball rotates about 1.5 rotations, then that's a bad set. This is super ridiculous. First of all, if you set a very low set, 1.5 rotations is actually quite a bit of spin. But if you set a very high set, 1.5 rotations isn't that much spin. So already 1.5 rotations is just a ridiculous standard. Unfortunately, it's the standard that people have planted in a lot of people's heads, and no one wants to let go of that rule of thumb. I can tell you right now, let go of that rule of thumb. If people are trying to ref you based on that rule of thumb, it's okay to call them out on it. You can't call out their judgment, so if they see a double contact, you can't question their judgment. But you can question their interpretation of the rules. So if you're in the middle of a tournament and a ref calls you and you ask what was wrong with that set, if that ref says, oh, it had too much spin, immediately you can stop play, you can ask for a tournament director or a manager, because they can come and clarify the rules to that ref who is misunderstanding the rules in that situation. Unfortunately, a lot of lower level tournaments these days, the tournament director, just to make things easy, they point out this 1.5 rotations thing that just has stuck in the collective consciousness. But it's okay to just drop this in your sphere of influence. Try to get people away from this thinking. Spin is not a fault in volleyball. So a question I have is, why hold yourself to a higher standard than professionals are being held to? And the answer is don't. Stop it. Just stop holding yourself to a higher standard. Hold yourself at maximum to the same standard that professionals are currently being held to. And I make a case that, hey, hold yourself to a lower standard. If you're not a good hand setter, you're never going to be good if you hold yourself to a ridiculous high standard. Here's why. If you are in any sort of doubtful situation about hand setting, you'll just revert to bump setting. So your bump setting is going to continue to be pretty good, and your hand setting is going to continue to be relatively poor, because you're just not trying to hand set very often. You're just relaxing to your old strategy of bump setting. So if you are very strict about your calls and, oh, I set that ball, but it had a little bit of corkscrew spin on it, so it must have been a double, then you're going to stop hand setting in that game, or you're only going to hand set when the pass is absolutely perfect, and then you try to set, and even then you might be like, oh, well, I messed up that set earlier, so I'm going to revert to my bump set, which I know I'm not going to double on my bump set. There is a huge advantage to hand setting in volleyball. Absolutely, right out of the gates, your consistency tends to be much higher with hand setting. So if you can get to your hand set, you can get the height more consistent set, the distance from your body, all these factors go up as you hand set as opposed to a bump set. If you're a person who claims, oh, my bump sets are better than my hand sets, or my bump sets are just as good as my hand sets, you have a lot of room for improvement in your hand sets, because your hand sets on average should be a lot more consistent than your bump sets. Another nice thing about hand sets is you generally telegraph to your partner a little bit more information, so they're subconsciously picking up on a little bit more visual cues based on where your body is, how your legs are loaded, and then when you push out, how hard you're pushing out. They see all of these elements and they know roughly where that ball is going to go, how high it's going to go, and they see kind of a gentle change of direction versus a bump set, which is an immediate change of direction, and you're just not able with your body to telegraph as much information to your partner with a bump set as a hand set. Of course, there's some exceptions here and there, but on average, your hand sets are going to be, one, more consistent, and they're, two, usually going to be easier for your partner to read and hit than a bump set, with some exceptions. Don't take my word for it. The professionals, the people who are competing to be the best in the world, almost all of the men nowadays are hand setting. And even when it's a ball that they'd probably be easier for them to bump set, you'll see them work harder to get under it, to get hands on it. And they're doing this for the two reasons I described. One is your hand sets tend to be more consistent, and two, they tend to be higher percentage chance that you're going to kill it. It's more risky to hand set because you could do a double or a lift, whereas when you bump set, you're generally not going to double that ball, and you will pretty much never lift a ball when you bump set. So they're working to that higher risk hand set because it's a higher reward, more consistent, and higher kill percentage. And even the women tend to, on average, have smaller hands, and with the smaller hands, hand sets they have different challenges, and so women have different techniques to compensate for this. And within the women's division, there are still women who generally bump set, and I think part of it might be because of the hand size. But even in the women's, more and more, as the referees relax what they call a double on, you're seeing more and more women hand setting. I think at the professional level, it's probably around a third of the women are now hand setting. There are some teams where one of the women hand sets almost everything that she possibly can. So even in the women's side, you're seeing a lot less bump setting than you used to, and a lot more hand setting. And in men's, you used to see a lot of bump setters, and those days are over. It's pretty much all men at the top level are all hand setting. Now this clip I'm going to show you, this is Taylor Crabb. He gets a ball passed to him, and you can see that he doesn't have his feet under him, so he can't drive and push that set out. So what he does is he pushes out, but pushes his body the opposite direction and falls into the sand. This is not that uncommon. It's not super common, but you will see it generally a few times in a single match. And I've done this as well. When you're generally out of position, it would be a throw if you keep your feet and you throw it. But if you push your body back, you're able to get that set out without throwing it and without a double contact. So if you are watching someone play and you see them fall while they're setting, that's okay. There's nothing technically wrong with that. And this also shows how important hand setting has become, is even when they can't get a good base under it, they're still choosing the hand set. Here's something that's come up a lot before. Some people think that the position you're in before, during, or after a set is a cause for a double contact or a lift, and this just isn't true. So from the 2020 FIVB casebook, 5.3.3, can a player complete a set from any possible position? And the answer is, the referee must consider only the rules. The referee should not consider the player's position prior to, during, or after the set. A player can potentially complete a legal set from any position. So don't call someone set just because they fell down. Last year I was playing in a very intense and fun game, and I sacrificed my body, somewhat similar to the Taylor Crabb video you just watched, and I fell down and I had a perfect set. It just felt so good, it looked good, everything about that set was gorgeous. And my partner at that time didn't even try to hit it. He just caught it and he called my set. And I think he was doing it based on my motion down to the ground, and I was very frustrated at the time. I've also had, in Boise, Idaho, I remember falling to my knees and I set, and I thought my set was perfect. And the referee called it, and I talked to that ref. He was just another player. I talked to that ref. I said, why'd you call that during that game? And he said, anytime you're on your knees and you set from your knees, it's a double. And he was wrong. So he's propagating some rule of thumb that he heard somewhere, and so that carries on into our era. So stop using any sort of rules of thumb. If you hear a rule of thumb, that's not a rule. It's just something you heard, and it's for kind of people maybe making the transition from jungle ball up to something more recreational and maybe even competitive. They might use rules of thumb, but rules of thumb are not rules. So there are several different governing bodies to volleyball, and they are trying to get the rules the same. There's a few kind of pesky differences between some rule sets. Indoor and outdoor have very clear differences in some cases that make sense, and so those will probably always stay in place. But when you go to different beach volleyball rule sets, it's kind of annoying to have differences because, you know, it's hard to keep track of, and when you do make a fault that in one rule set that's not a fault in another, like how do you go about that? So I'll address this in just a moment, but really quickly I wanted to show you from a multiple contact perspective on a second ball hit. The rules are identical for what has to happen for it to be called a multiple contact or a lift in indoor versus outdoor. So the rules are the same, but the enforcement is vastly different. So let me just show you a clip of some indoor sets. And as we watch these clips, what's interesting to note, I didn't even have to look for these. These are almost every set indoors. More than half the sets come out with this kind of crazy rotation. So the idea that rotation is an indication of a double, well, that means indoors they're just letting them get away with doubles, which is not the case. Double contacts, although they are more lax indoors than they are outdoors, they're still not allowed. And certainly you can see with all this rotation just how different the enforcement is. Even though the rules are the same, you get away with a ton of rotation indoors, and in this much rotation actually you would not get away with outdoors. This is just an incredible amount. Now we're going to look at different rule sets. If different rule sets don't interest you, that's okay. You can just know that there's 3 different rule sets that really matter. It's international indoor, that's one rule set, and a second rule set is international beach, and a third rule set is California Beach Volleyball Association. And they're all trying to make the rules between the beach roughly the same. There are a few pesky differences. And AVP, which is an American-based beach volleyball company, they just use the FIVB rules, International Beach Rules, so they keep it simple there. And California Beach Volleyball has slightly different rules, and maybe they'll finally roll those into the same category at some future point. But let's just take a look at the international beach rules versus indoor rules. They're written identically. The ball may touch any part of the body. Yes, you can kick the ball. It's totally fine. You can use your shoulder, you can use your chest, you can use your head. And I've seen, there's plenty of examples of volleyball players using their feet to kick a ball. It's totally fine. The days are over when you can't use your feet. Now any part of your body is legal. 9.2.2, the ball must not be caught or thrown. It can rebound in any direction. It is a catch fault if the ball is caught and or thrown, or if it does not rebound from the hit. This is so open to interpretation. Oh my goodness. Currently, indoor refs allow less of a catch. So indoor refs, what you'll notice is the ball is in and out really quickly for indoor setters. It's almost like they're just barely touching it. That'll probably be a moving goalpost, like what's a catch. Right now in beach, you're allowed to hold that ball a little bit longer versus indoor. And then the counter is indoor, you're allowed to get away with a little bit more of a double than you are outdoor. Outdoor doubles are not tolerated as much. Let's talk about a double or a simultaneous contact. So 9.2.2.1, the ball may touch various parts of the body provided that the contact takes place simultaneously. A double contact fault is where a player hits the ball twice in succession or contacts the ball at various parts of his or her body in succession. Note, the judgment of this rule will probably continue to shift with time, but currently, indoor refs are more forgiving of double contacts than beach refs, perhaps to compensate for the fact that they can't hold the ball as long. Even though the rules are identical, the rules are written identically for these two, indoor versus beach, but the enforcement seems to be different. So now I'm just going to walk you through really quickly a couple basic points about hand setting that are consistent across whether you're beach or indoor or whatever. So if you've never played volleyball or you're new to it, it looks like you catch and throw the ball on a set. It looks exactly like that. And I just read you a rule that said you can't catch or throw the ball. And so it looks like people are catching and throwing. There's lots of different styles of setting. One thing that is consistent across all volleyball is you can't bring the ball down with your arms. Once you touch the ball, it's got to only be out. And one way to know if this is happening is you watch the elbows. So if I'm setting, my elbows stay here, and as soon as the ball touches, my fingers let the ball fall down and stop the ball. but my elbows stay here and my elbows only push out. So I'm not starting here, touching the ball, coming down, and then throwing it. Instead, it's just an out. So my fingers let the ball come down a little, but I'm only pushing out. And even if a player kind of guides it in like this, they're not touching it until they're at the bottom, and then once they touch it, it's only out. So the volleyball, once I'm here, once the volleyball contacts me, my elbows only push out. And also, you're not in the contact with the ball that long. Usually the ball comes out before you're fully extended. So a lift or a catch is when you have the ball contact and you bring it down. That's already going to get you a catch. If once you catch it, you kind of keep it still for too long, or it comes to visible rest, that's going to be a catch. Or if I kind of hold it too long as I push it out. So at any point, if I'm holding the ball too long, if it comes to visible rest, or I slow it down really slowly, or I push it out really slowly, all of those, and for a long time, all of those are going to be called a catch or a lift. A double contact can happen three ways. One, it can happen on the way in. So as long as, let's say I'm setting with these 6 points of contact. I've got 4 fingers and 2 thumbs that are going to touch the ball. So those 6 points of contact have to be all simultaneous. From the moment I start touching the ball, all 6 points of contact have to be touching at the same time. And to the moment I release, they all have to release at the same time. So you can't like catch it with these 2 fingers and then touch it with your middle finger and then push out. So a double contact can happen at 3 different times. It can happen on the way in. So if while the ball's coming in, it hits my right hand first, for example, and then it settles into, so I catch it here and it settles in. And there's 2 cues for this. Certainly if it does that, it hits here first and then rolls in, and then I push it out, it might not have any rotation at all. So it's a much better cue for this type of a double contact is a bop-bop. You'll hear 2 sounds in rapid succession, an auditory clue. You'll hear a bop-bop. See that sound? That sound, you can hear that pretty well as a ref. So you're going to hear these fingers are contacting it, and then these. So you'll hear a very rapid succession. You'll also see the ball shift. Once they catch it, it'll shift funny. So you'll see like a weird movement, generally some sort of rotation of the ball that looks like it got caught here and then came in. And automatically that's a double. So if it's shifting in their hands, you know that it's hit some parts of their body before others. Another double contact is when you're pushing it out. So once I've caught it, let's say I caught it all perfectly at the simultaneous time, but maybe I'm trying to push it really far across the court and it accidentally shoots. I get rid of it off this hand first, and then I get rid of it off that hand. That's a double contact. You can't release with some points of contact before others. You have to release with all points of contact at the same time. And the last way to get a double contact is if it touches another part of your body. So a very common one that happens to me is when I set, sometimes, depending on where I am, it'll come and it'll hit my forehead. So it's contacted my fingers all at the same time, bounces off my forehead, comes out clean, everything looks good, but I know in my soul that I've double contacted it because it hit another part of my body during the setting process. As a ref, these are kind of hard to see. Sometimes you can hear it, sometimes you can see it, sometimes they get away with it. It's just one of those things. If you're playing at a recreational level, it's call yourself, because generally when I'm playing with other people and I'm watching the set as an opponent, I don't see when they contact and it hits their forehead. Some people it hits their chest. That's all a double contact. Every person who sets has a different, unique setting style. But things we talked about that has to be the same is you can't, once you catch the ball, you can't bring it down and then push it back out. So everyone who's setting needs to have some style where their elbows only go out once they've caught the ball. That is consistent across all setters. Some setters like me, the ball's in and out very quickly, and so generally refs use a sliding scale. If your individual style is you hold on to the ball for a little bit longer and you really make sure to get that ball like the old-fashioned clean set and you don't want any rotation, the referee's going to be a little bit more forgiving of you holding that ball a little bit longer if it's always coming out with that clean-looking no rotation. Or on the other side of the spectrum, a lot of indoor setters, myself included, we tend to hold the ball very little. So if I've got the ball in and out very quickly, a ref's going to be a little bit more forgiving about the double contacts and certainly more forgiving about rotation on the ball. So within your own unique style, there's sort of a shifting spectrum of the longer you hold it, the more clean it has to look when it comes out. And maybe the shorter you hold it, the more forgiving of a double or rotation they are. I have two quick asides in this video. The first aside is talking about adding rotation to the ball or spin to the ball without a double contact. So this is entirely possible if we think about physics for a second, and we could design a robot that it only touches the volleyball at 4 points of contact and always simultaneously. So this robot always sets a perfect set from the perspective of not a multiple contact. It touches at 4 points and it always lets go at the same time. So it's not a double or a multiple contact ball. But I could design this robot to introduce any spin I wanted. So once that robot is going to set it, it could basically start spinning the ball, and as long as it lets go all at the same time, and all 4 points of contact come off the ball, it could start spinning and let go, and that spin of that ball will continue. So you could introduce any type of spin, back spin, top spin, corkscrew spin, even side spin. You could introduce all those without doing a double contact. So again, it's very important to let go of these ideas that, oh, spin means there was a double contact. Spin may be an indicator of a double contact, but as we saw earlier, in the higher levels of volleyball, spin is a terrible indicator of a double contact. It just isn't that useful of a tool anymore. So I encourage you to let go of it and start using your auditory clues and your visual clues of it rocking in place while it's in their hands. That's typically a sign of a double contact. What's happening in their hands, not once it's left their hands, but in their hands. And I took some notes from a match that I watched. This is an FIVB match that was held in January of 2020, so pre-COVID, and it was between the US and Netherlands, two great teams. And Anders Mol, one of the best hand setters in the world, he set 6 times in the first set. And of those, 2 of them, so 1/3 of the time he was hand setting, 2 of them had significant spin. One was a corkscrew type spin. And what I mean by corkscrew is when it comes out, it's spinning like a corkscrew. And a lot of people think, oh, if it has corkscrew, it's automatically a fault. And that's just not true. So Anders Mol, one of the best in the world, he had considerable noticeable corkscrew on one and a lot of topspin on another. Neither was called as a double fault or as a double contact. And in that same match, Taylor Crabb set 9 times with his hands, and 2 of those were corkscrew, and very noticeable, not like a little bit, but reasonable amount. And one had backspin or underspin. And a lot of people think, oh, if it's got backspin, that's the magic spin that means it was a double. This is incorrect. Again, remember, we could design a robot that with 4 points of contact could introduce any spin it wants and still have a simultaneous contact, so a non-double contact. So the quick takeaway is, in that match that I watched, I just was taking notes in the first set, 1/3 of the time, the best guys in the world were hand setting. It was coming out with noticeable spin. So if you look at the amount of spin on the ball, it's in excess of what a lot of the lower level players tolerate. Lower level players are holding themselves to a higher standard than the current beach professionals are being held to. All right, and this is my second and last aside. Some quick technical notes about rules. Let's get to the different rules of beach versus indoor. So really quickly, in indoor, you can double contact the ball on the first hit of the team, even if you hand set the first contact. And so I'll just show you here. Here's 2 examples where the first hit of the team, they set and it's clearly a double contact, but it doesn't matter because in indoor, you are allowed to have a double contact on the first hit of the team, even if you're hand setting it. It doesn't have to be perfect. In FIVB or AVP, they allow a double contact on the first hit of the team, except when you hand set it. So basically, if the ball comes over the net and you try to hand set that in beach, you cannot double that ball. And it's kind of stupid. I think this is stupid anyway. People hold you to a higher standard. So if you do choose, if the first ball over is easy and you do choose to hand set it, they want it to come out really clean. And there's nothing in the rules about that. This is one of the pesky differences between the California rule set and the AVP/FIVB rules, is the first ball that comes over, if I hit that, and let's say it's not a hard driven, if I hit that in one motion, if it hits two parts of my body, FIVB and AVP allow it, CBVA doesn't. So a classic example where you see this is on a serve receive, which by definition a serve cannot be considered a hard driven ball. So serve receive, someone really hits a nice hard serve at you and it goes off of your hands and it catches your ball cap or your visor. In that case, if you are playing CBVA rules, that is a fault. And it's pesky because if you're playing AVP, which uses FIVB rules, it's totally fine. It's fine as long as it's one motion. So if you pass it and it's bad and then you intentionally head it as a second motion, that's illegal no matter what rule set you're using. But if it's just one motion, it goes off two parts of your body, the first contact of your team on that side, it's perfectly legal for that to happen in FIVB/AVP rules. And unfortunately it's illegal in CBVA. We do know they're trying to make these rules more consistent, so hopefully they'll pick one, because it's kind of annoying. This does happen when you play beach volleyball. This does happen several times a day, so you have to decide in advance which rule set are we going to use. So I wish they would just pick one and go with it for both rule sets. One other difference between rule sets of indoor versus beach, if you're playing indoor and the ball is hard driven and you sort of catch the ball and then pass it, it's not allowed. But in beach, they're being very forgiving on a hard driven ball. You can get away with a lot. If it's hard driven and you're just purely defensive, man, you can get away with so much. As long as it's one motion, you can get away with multiple contacts, not just two, but multiple. So it can kind of hit here, hit here, hit here. As long as it's one motion, it doesn't matter that it hit me in 3 spots. That's still just considered one hit. Or I can get away with a bit of a catch, and it's specific to an overhand catch. So if it's hard driven at my face, I can kind of catch the ball and throw it a little bit. So they do make an exception that you're allowed to lift that ball more. But that rule does not apply if my forearms are horizontal and my palms are face up, and if I lift it like that, that's not allowed. And this is consistent across the different beach rule sets. So that's it for my asides. In summary, stop using spin. Just don't use spin as an indicator of a bad set. Pay attention to what's happening in their hands. If it's held too long, it's a lift or a catch. If it contacts multiple times and the contact is not simultaneous, then it's a double. That's it. That's what's bad for hand sets. And the amount of spin is fairly irrelevant. If it has a ton of spin, you're going to have a hard time convincing someone you did not double contact that ball. So of course, if it's a ton of spin, but in the videos I showed you, there's more and more spin is being allowed in the beach volleyball rules, and there was a ton of spin in the indoor stuff. So as these rule sets come closer and closer, maybe they're going to allow tons of spin in beach. As long as your contact is simultaneous, maybe they're going to keep allowing more and more spin in the outdoor world. Another thing to consider is, what are you gaining by being such a perfectionist about hand setting? Hand setting is clearly the superior form of setting. So by being really perfectionist about how clean these sets have to be, all you're doing is holding yourself back from becoming a better player. You're holding the people you're playing against back from being better players. Because ideally you want everyone to be hand setting. If every time the ball's not perfectly to me, I choose to bump set, well, guess what? I'm probably not going to get better at hand setting. Whereas if I relax my standards slightly, then maybe I'm going to get to more balls and try to get hand sets on them. Shout out to my friend Ryan McGuire. He is a player and a coach down here in San Diego, and something he started instituting is when he played with a group, he'd say, hey, how about we just don't call doubles today? And if everyone agrees, then it's fine. And the nice thing about this is then suddenly people who've never hand set their whole life, they have this confidence that, oh, it doesn't matter if I double. So I'm going to run over and I'm going to get hands on it. And so they become better hand setters. And certainly your hitters love it when you hand set. So if I've got a partner who's typically a bump setter, yeah, they might be pretty good at bump setting, but when they start using their hands, ooh, it's just a lot nicer to hit. A shout out to Ontario, where the best women in the world, the best 2 women in women's beach volleyball right now are Canadian, and they're from Ontario. And what they're doing there is something I think is pretty cool, is even in tournaments, they're saying, hey, if your shoulders are square to where you're setting, even if you double, it's okay. So they're just trying to, and it's a women's league, so they're trying to encourage these young women to use their hands more often, because you can't get better at hand setting unless you hand set. And you're not going to get better at hand setting unless you're trying to hand set in all types of different situations. So they're basically saying, hey, you can get away with a double as long as you're square to where you're setting. And what I mean by square is my shoulders are aimed where I'm trying to set. So if I'm trying to set this way, my shoulders are aiming the same way I'm setting. So that's kind of a cool rule change that you can talk about with people is, hey, let's not call hands today, or let's not call doubles. Or, hey, let's not call doubles if you're square to where you're setting. Just a couple of ideas for you if you're really trying to get better and hit that next level of volleyball. Hand setting is so crucial to getting to higher levels these days. Thanks for joining me today. If you're liking these analytics videos, please hit the subscribe button, and that'll give me an idea that, hey, I should create more of them. Certainly the like button helps, so hit that like button. And comments really help me understand if people are agreeing with these ideas, or if they're still questioning, or maybe they know something I don't know, which would be super helpful as well. So if you could provide a comment, that would be really helpful as well. I hope this video helps you and the volleyball community collectively. Thanks for watching.